Hello. Today I'm going to be talking about the Mongol Derby promo doc that I shot for my friend Olivia. Just kind of a breakdown of how we went about it and a couple of my thoughts about the piece. Let's jump into it. I love this drone shot
There's
so much.
There's nothing like riding a horse.
The flare was completely accidental.
It's a very subtle connection, but it's so intuitive.
I love this shot. So I felt like at the beginning it was important to capture her ethos, like her idea of like what horse racing was or what it meant to ride a horse. I felt like it was important to kind of document that. That way there was kind of a frame of reference for the audience to try to understand her perspective. Also, this shot that I'm paused on, just the dynamic range of the FX30 is pretty rad. We're getting a full definition of the sun. The shadows are in, like, looking at the raw footage, you wouldn't think that like the clip is good. Like you would think it's overexposed, but in reality the FX30 retains all of the information of the highlights, and you can pull it back down and ultimately just raise your dynamic range. Just some of the technical specs: we were shooting on the FX30 with the 16 to 55 G 2.8 and the F4 24 to 105. The 105 was used a lot during the different horse riding segments.
Autoimmune is really hard to describe to people. Like if you can imagine moving through molasses all day long and not being able to think.
I'm really proud of this interview setup because I'm creating layers of light. There's a bright spot on the left, there's a dark spot, then directly in front of that dark spot is the bright part of her face, and then right behind the dark spot of her face is the bright outside. It's creating layers and it's creating depth.
Socially, I would say has been one of the biggest areas of my life it's affected. I was always kind of the wallflower. I was just such a quiet kid and I didn't know how to connect.
Now, some of these shots are very, very long. You know, I'm on the Sony F4 24 to 105, and it's a very, very long lens, especially on a Super 35 sensor. So it was really hard to find focus, and I'm really amazed how well the autofocus on the FX30 was able to track her through this crazy fast-moving background at 120 frames a second.
With other people, and just being so limited by my body's capacity. But when I would go out with the horses, it was like I felt okay. I got my first horse when I was 11 years old, and she was this really old Morgan mare, like totally bomb-proof, like barefoot, bareback, just jump on and we would like tear around the field. She was such a great horse because...
Now, all the sound you're hearing of the horses racing through the field is all done in post. I found everything from horse neighing to breathing to trotting sound effects on Artlist. I've been really impressed with the Artlist selection of sound effects, and I think it simplifies a lot of process when you're solo shooting like this. Our B camera for this was actually a Blackmagic Pocket 4K, and I was really impressed with how easy it was to match the two in the grade.
Like nothing fazed her.
What's your take on the horse girl stereotype?
That question made me laugh so much when I read that, because there is like such a stereotype with horse people. I feel like we can be a little bit eccentric with our horses because what we're experiencing is so cool.
This is Rosie, and she's going to start her endurance career this year. She has done one 25-mile race and one 50-mile race.
So this is Olivia's mentor, Claire, and we really wanted to give her a different feeling from the rest of the piece. And so actually I switched to a different film stock emulation. I switched to the Kodak 2383 6500 Kelvin daylight. And it kind of pulls more of the blues into the footage. And I felt like the blue on her shirt kind of made her skin pop. In reality, it's a very hot day. The fact that we could make it feel as cool and kind of serene as possible was kind of the goal. And I'm really surprised with the color of the FX30 and how easy it was to push it in that direction.
And so we'll start doing 50-mile races for about 2 years, and then she'll bump up to 100. My husband wanted a motorcycle, so we had a deal he could get a motorcycle if I could get a horse. 10 years later, his motorcycle is gone, and I have 8 horses. A farm. You have to be in the best shape you've been in your whole life. One of the things I was out to prove was that age ain't nothing but a number.
Yeah.
This shot was incredibly difficult because that wire there in front of us is an electric live wire. And I'm walking backwards, like sort of fumbling around and that's trying desperately not to fall into the electrified wire. I didn't, thankfully. But again, I'm just like really blown away by how well the FX30 held the highlights and brought them all back into a situation that is extremely high contrast. And exposing on the FX30 and all of the Sony cameras really is entirely different from the way that I'm used to. I'm used to shooting on Canon, which is like what you see is what you get. With Sony, there's a little bit more play in the way that you have to film. You have to overexpose in the log settings to get a good image. And that was weird for me, but I think it really worked out.
So, because I had my 60th birthday when I was there.
Oh, really? In Mongolia?
In Mongolia, at the celebration party was actually my birthday. When you do endurance riding, there are a lot of people in the United States, and they do 25-mile races, 50-mile races, and 100-mile races. Most of the people in the endurance community know about the Mongol Derby.
Most of Mongolia is.
And here, obviously, like I wanted to show how crazy this race is. And luckily a storm had come through because it's, the fall in South Carolina. So it was going to rain. So there was plenty of storm clouds to capture and wildly different lighting situations to deal with. But I think it added to the story. And I think something to keep in mind when you're shooting documentary is you don't really know what you have until the end. It's not pre-planned. You're trying to create situations where people can be authentic and speak their mind, but sometimes you just get lucky.
It's just wild lands. There is nothing out there.
When every time you go over a hill, you don't know what's going to be there.
You basically ride sun up to sundown.
Again, more stock footage from all this, just
in my wild
coming in
Mongolian
clutch.
ponies. And you have no idea what you're gonna get.
When you're riding one of the horses and you're on a runaway and you have no brakes, you have
That part
to
with
give up
the
all
horse
control.
bucking.
The Derby, it
Like,
really strips you
that
down.
was actually
You don't
kinda
have
terrifying.
Instagram and Facebook, and you can't, call mom and dad on the phone. You don't have luxuries. You have yourself, you have the horse, and you have the wild.
I love
When
the
you're
shot.
10
Olivia getting on the
miles
horse
from
with the
anybody,
clouds in the
it can-
background and looking out at the distance. It's amazing how much detail is retained in her face. Looking at the raw image, I thought all of that was gone. I thought everything was overexposed. The background was just going to be white, like just gone. And it's crazy how much detail you can pull out of the highlights. Really, it's amazing.
Why are you insane and want to do this?
Why not? Everyone asks me that, and I'm like, it's the adventure of a lifetime.
And this is where we kick into I'm going to beat this.
I just
I'm going to
always felt
prove
a connection
to myself that I can
with
do
horses
anything.
and with nature. I want to prove to myself that I can overcome any obstacle.
That Mongol Derby is a very spiritual experience. And it's not only spiritual with the horses, it's spiritual with the land.
10 days alone with a horse is a long time. And confronting loneliness, that's part of the draw to the race. Am I willing to press on? I guess I want to know what I'm made of.
And that's the piece. So talking a bit about how we approached the project, I knew the general basis of what the story was going to be, but I didn't know the specifics. So I wanted to spend some time working with her to actually get some of the specifics of the story. So my first tip for shooting short documentaries is to do an interview first. Even if you don't necessarily use a lot of it, or even if you don't use any of it, it's going to allow the person to kind of flesh out their story and go through the details that could turn into different film moments. I was unaware that Olivia was autoimmune, so that information then led to the types of shots that we got when the storm clouds were coming in, when she was mounting the horse. It informed kind of the tone that we were going for. The interview provided the guidance for the content that we captured. So I think it's really important to do the interview first so you can get a better picture of what they're actually talking about. Going over Olivia's interview setup, we were in this barn. It was a really great barn, very clean, very cleared out, but it was way too dark. We needed to introduce a lot more light. So we had a Godox 200 watt shooting onto Olivia through some diffusion. We had the light coming in from outside, hitting onto the left there. And then in that back room, we actually placed some stick lights to kind of bring up the level, and so it wasn't so dark in those rooms. So a second tip for shooting documentary, when you're doing interviews, you want to make sure that there's differences between the two interviews. The interview with Olivia and the interview with Claire were very different from each other. One was outside, kind of flat lighting in the shade. One was indoors, very dramatic lighting. The other thing is that Olivia is framed right looking left and Claire is framed left looking right. So when it cuts between them, it doesn't look like you're replacing them over each other. You know what I mean? They look like they're having a conversation or that you're a part of a group. And it kind of just communicates to your brain that they're different people that have different experiences, which helps because they have different modes of thinking about the race. So after we were finished in the barn, we moved right outside the barn. The road to the farm leading to the main road was lined by these beautiful trees, and we decided to shoot some there. We did Claire's interview. We did the little conversation between Claire and Olivia. And then we did a walk and talk with the horse. Now, we didn't use any of that footage because it didn't necessarily fit into the tone that the edit ended up becoming. Something I wish I would have done a little more is spend some time pre-proing the structure of the piece. Like, how did I actually want it to come out? When I initially shot it, I thought it was going to be a lot more verite and a little more conversational and laid back, but then it started to become a pitch video to help Olivia enter in and train for the Mongol Derby. Again, the text on screen was kind of just a necessity. It wasn't really a thing that I had planned for. It wasn't a thing that I thought was going to happen, but ultimately this content was not captured on the day. I felt like the text was a good break in the action to get us to where we needed to go, which was the story of Olivia overcoming autoimmune, but also just being on this journey of trying to recapture adventure. I also feel like text sometimes can cause people to engage with a piece a little bit more because then they have to actively read it. The other thing was also the title of the video mentions the Mongol Derby, so you're at least kind of prepared for some sort of information about it if you don't know what it is. If you do know what it is, you can kind of just sit back and relax. But again, with the pre-pro, if I had set out different key points that we needed to hit in the order that we needed to hit them, I think I would have had them describe what the Mongol Derby is, how they heard about it, and like what was their experience wanting to do something like this. And I think that's where the text kind of comes in. And then we had Olivia start getting on the horse. Well, that's when the storm clouds started rolling in.
We're with Olivia, just kind of hearing more about the race, and her mentor, Claire, who has done the race. And we're trying to get some footage before a storm comes in. But we got some good stuff already. Now we just need some stuff of her actually riding.
We really frantically, in the course of about 5 minutes, shot all of that footage of her getting on the horse with the clouds in the background. So after everything kind of dried out, then we went outside and started filming the horse riding footage. Initially, we didn't think that was going to be most of the piece, so we exhausted all of the shots that we got basically for the horse riding segment at the beginning. It was pretty wild, the contrast of the scenes, and I was amazed at how well the cameras held up to that contrast, how easy it was in post to pull the highlights back down to make them work. Because you know, it's just rained, everything is glistening, the grass is beautiful. Like, I think if I had to redo something, I would make the interview maybe a little bit less contrasty. And that is kind of the downside to shooting the interview first, is then the look of the piece is kind of set. Our B camera was the Blackmagic Pocket 4K with a 24-105 Canon lens on it as well. A lot of the stuff we shot in the back half of the video is handheld, and I was pretty happy with how the FX30 handled the stabilization of it all. Even in post, it stabilized pretty easily. My final tip for shooting short docs is, like, find your best shot and put it at the beginning. Figure out a way to make it work. This opening shot with the drone and the lens flare, I did not plan that. It kind of encapsulated a lot of the beginning of the story, and honestly, this shot dictated the beginning of the story. Partly because it was just so evocative, and it was like it's a really nice shot. Like, and part of that was the drone was like wet because I'd put it in the grass to make it take off, and it got completely wet. Anyway, that's the breakdown of my short doc, The Adventure of a Lifetime. And yeah, we'd love to do a feature-length version of it if anybody's interested, giving us lots of money. But it was really fun filming, and I'm really happy it turned out the way that it did. Thanks for watching.
They love you, dude.
I think they just love humans. Human contact. Huh.